Hi everyone, Susan Storm here, and I'm a certified MBTI practitioner and the founder of Psychology Junkie, and today I want to talk about the Myers-Briggs personality types and asking for help. So I recently conducted a survey. I sent it to all my email list, I sent it to my followers, my clients, my friends, and I was trying to figure out how the different types react to stress. We have lots of research on this already. If you haven't read Naomi Quank's book, Was That Really Me? And that talks a lot about grip stress. That's an amazing place to start. But there is research about this, but I haven't seen a lot of surveys that have been done about stress and how the different types respond. So I wanted to do that. And one of the questions I asked in the survey was, when you're stressed, do you know how to ask for help from others? And I got a wide variety of responses, and I'm just going to break some of those down today based on some of the answers that I saw in the survey, some of the comments people left, as well as some of the research I've already done about the different types. So at the moment, I have about 1,400 responses to this survey. I'm hoping for a lot more, and as I go, I will keep updating. But I have a pretty large pool of respondents at the moment, so I'm just going to go ahead and dig right in. The type that had the most trouble with asking for help was the ISP personality type. ISFPs, only 5% of them said they knew how to ask for help when they were stressed. And this was such a staggeringly low number compared to the other personality types that responded. In the comments, what I saw was that a lot of ISFPs felt that people didn't really understand them, and that they also felt a great responsibility to just handle their own problems. They have this mindset that everyone is responsible for their own fate and everyone is responsible for their own feelings. This doesn't mean they're not empathetic or compassionate. In fact, they can be some of the best listeners you'll ever come across. But it does mean that they tend to feel like they are the ones in charge of their feelings and that they are the ones who need to handle them. And they also sometimes tend to feel like what they have going on is too complex to really verbalize to someone else. One of the things that Carl Jung said about the introverted feeling type, and I think this is relevant here, he said still waters run deep is very true of these types. He also said they are mostly silent, inaccessible, and hard to understand. Now, I've met many ISFPs who are so authentic and real and genuine, but at the same time, they do tend to keep part of themselves guarded. A lot of their deeper feelings are inside. They're not just out for anyone to see. And they tend to be protective of their inner selves and not readily sharing all their information. They're less likely to just data dump all their feelings on somebody else. Next were ISTPs. ISTPs, only 13.33% said that they knew how to ask for help when they were stressed. Now, ISTPs, I've known a lot of these types, and this completely tracks. My older brother is an ISTP, and I don't think I have ever heard him ask for help except in one absolute emergency where someone he loved needed a ride to a hospital. This was the only time. And these types are so capable, they're so resourceful, they're really good at thinking on their feet and being problem solvers. Not only are they really good at troubleshooting and problem solving, they're also very fast and they're very quick-witted. And so when a problem comes up, they generally are very competent in dealing with it for themselves. And I think in the MBTI manual, it states that ISTPs are very common in emergency service fields, and this is actually true for ISFPs as well. Whether they are EMTs, emergency room workers, firefighters even, these people think well in a crisis and they think well on their feet. And also for ISFPs, there tends to be a certain fear of vulnerability. They tend to struggle a little bit more with understanding where they are in relation to other people and who is close to them, who's not. Asking for help is one of those things that can take a lot of vulnerability, and that's something that generally ISTPs shy away from. It makes sense to me that only 13.33% of ISTPs knew how to ask for help when they were stressed. Next on the list, ENTJs. ENTJs, only 20.83% said that they knew how to ask for help when they were stressed. And this one didn't surprise me either. ENTJs tend to foster a sense of control in everything that they're doing. They do not like to feel out of control. And while they are good at delegating, so if there's a job to do, they're good at getting other people involved so that the job can get done. When it comes to their own stress levels, rather than asking for help, they tend to retreat when they're extremely stressed. When ENTJs are in the grip of stress, they go to a more introverted feeling place. They pull back more. They tend to become weighed down by their own feelings. And often during this time, it's very difficult for them to verbalize what they're going through, and it's very difficult for them to ask for help. So in a day-to-day sense, it's very easy for ENTJs to delegate, but in a state of stress where they're feeling really overwhelmed, during that state, it's much harder for them to reach out to people and feel vulnerable, because during those times they tend to feel more out of control. And this tends to be something they want to hide from other people more than reveal. Next on the list were ISFJs. 21.5% of ISFJs said that they knew how to ask for help when they were stressed. And when I was looking at the comments, what I saw over and over again from ISFJs was that they didn't want to burden anyone else. That's the thing with ISFJs, and what you'll find with feeling judgers in particular that holds them back. But ISFJs, more so than any of the other feeling judgers, is they tend to be very nurturing, they tend to be very giving and selfless, but it's very difficult for them to give themselves the same care and consideration that they give to other people. Quite a few ISFJs commented and said, I just know other people have a lot going on and I don't want to add something to their plate, so this is why I don't tend to ask for help. And while they might encourage their friends to ask for help, let me know if you need anything, please ask me for help, they don't tend to give themselves the same benefit. And so if you're an ISFJ and you're watching this, just remember to count yourself just as important as all those other people that you're helping, because you are just as important, and the people who love you want to help you. So do not think of it as, oh, there's too much on their plate, I don't want to add something. Think of it as giving the people who care about you a chance to care about you and a chance to show that you matter to them. Next on our list, INTPs. 23.81% said that they struggled to ask for help. Again, not too surprising. Introverted thinking dominant types, INTPs and ISTPs, tend to be very independent. They tend to focus very much on autonomy and mastery and troubleshooting, and so they often don't feel like they need someone else when a problem shows up. They're not the first people to pick up a phone and ask someone to come support them. When it comes to stress, more likely they're going to dive into their introverted thinking and see if they can troubleshoot the problem. Many times they think they're going to be the best person for the job when it comes to this. Like, they don't need to outsource a lot of their thinking. What happens with INTPs, though, is sometimes they feel emotionally vulnerable, especially if they're having a grip response, which, if you're not sure what the grip is, I will leave a link to my article in the information description. That's the word I'm thinking of. INTPs, when they're in the grip of their inferior function, extroverted feeling, can feel more vulnerable. They may feel like they want to feel connected to people and that they want to reach out, but they also feel very stressed. They also feel very vulnerable, and they also feel like it could damage their relationships, so they may say something stupid. They tend to feel shy in these situations, and so they tend to hold themselves back from asking for help sometimes when they need it most. Next, we have INTJs. 25.4% of INTJs said that they knew how to ask for help when they were stressed. Again, not too surprising with INTJs. INTJs tend to crave autonomy and independence. They tend to take a lot of pride in handling their own problems and having their ducks in a row. What they don't tend to feel good about is being vulnerable, sharing their feelings very openly. That tends to take a lot more courage for them than it would for certain other types. It's also difficult for them to verbalize their feelings to other people unless there's a really deep level of trust right there. They tend to feel like whatever they're feeling is no one else's business and they're going to handle it on their own. Now, this doesn't mean that INTJs don't have feelings. INTJs can be very sensitive, compassionate people, but they don't tend to wear their hearts on their sleeve. Instead, they tend to compartmentalize their feelings so that they can focus on tasks that they need to do. So when an INTJ experiences a lot of stress, the first thing they're going to try to do is come up with the strategy. And they're the ultimate strategist, so they don't really need other people's help with that necessarily. They're also going to look at resources, problem solving. They're going to look at the logic of the situation. What are their options? What are the pros and cons of each option? What is going to get them the result they want as fast as possible? And what's going to have the greatest long-term impact? And when they get into a grip stress, they tend to become more impulsive and restless and action-oriented. But none of these things tend to make them reach out to other people and ask for help. INTJs often have to reach a real breaking point before they're going to ask for help. And even then, many times, they don't do it. When I was reading the comments from INTJs, most of them said, "I need to ask for help. No one is going to handle this as competently as I am." And many of them definitely expressed disillusionment with the level of help they could even receive from other people. They felt very confident in their own ability to solve their problems. Others felt like when they tried to find words to express their feelings, it was almost impossible, and that people just wouldn't understand. And so there was a lot of that, a lot of no one else is going to handle this as competently as me, and no one's going to even understand the emotions that I'm going through. And for others, it was just felt very vulnerable to even ask for help. Like, why would I? It just feels icky to them. Next on the list, ISTJ. 26.32% of ISTJs did know how to ask for help when they were stressed. Similar reasons to INTJs. ISTJs tend to do their own thing. They tend to be in charge of their own lives. They tend to feel vulnerable when they're expressing their emotions. And when they're highly stressed, rather than calling up a friend and emotionally venting about everything that's going on in their lives, they're more likely to enter problem-solving mode. They're more likely to focus on what they know from their past that's worked before, or they're going to tap into their extroverted thinking side and look for the most productive, efficient ways to solve their problems. When it comes to emotional issues, that's when they need to pull away, and they tend to get into their introverted feeling side, and they will simmer over what's going on for them emotionally. But because they don't use extroverted feeling, this process is very personal. It's very individual to use someone as a sounding board. Instead, a lot of that process goes on internally by themselves. Several ISTJs responded. Thank you for those who did. I always love it, by the way. If you take one of my surveys, please leave comments if you feel like it. There's a section at the end. Is there anything else you'd like to share? As much detail as you can give me, that the more detail, the better. It helps me to further understand what's going on for the types. Several ISTJs responded and said that when they're stressed, they just need to be alone. The last thing they need is to talk to someone else or to get someone else involved, because trying to explain the whole problem to them would be more work than for them to just deal with it themselves. It would actually be more stressful to bring someone else into the equation rather than to just cope with it themselves. Next on the list were INFPs. 30.11% of INFPs knew how to ask for help from others when they're stressed. INFPs, like ISFPs, tend to process their feelings internally. They tend to be very individualistic, and they tend to just need a lot of alone time when they first experience stress, rather than to immediately reach out to someone and enter a conversation with them. Expressing their own feelings. Their feelings are so deep on the inside, it's harder for them to find words to sum it all up to somebody else. Every introverted function tends to feel more rich and complex on the inside, and is harder to verbalize quickly through words. So this is why you can have introverted intuitives that struggle to explain their epiphanies and insights, because it's so complex and deep and internal that finding simple words to express their insight can be very challenging. And this is the same for introverted feeling. Introverted feeling types have a lot of deep, complex emotions. Bringing them out to other people can feel very personal, it can feel very vulnerable, and it can feel like words just don't do it justice. And so many times IFPs just need to be alone to process when they're going through stress. Quite a few INFPs said that they would rather write things down in their journal when they're stressed than talk to a person about it. But there were several INFPs who did have one close friend or one close family member that they reached out to. But it's a matter of finding that person that they can really trust, because INFPs do not share their feelings with just anyone. They have to establish a great deal of trust first. Next on the list were ESTJs. 31.80% of ESTJs knew how to ask for help when they were going through stress. These types tend to be delegators. They tend to be good at organizing people to achieve a goal. So if they're stressed and it has something to do with a work or a project, then they're pretty good at getting the team on board and doling out tasks so that the problem can be solved. When it comes to their personal problems, again, they're going to run into some of the same issues that ENTJs run into, where they tend to pull away and try to process it on their own rather than venting their feelings to other people. Now, 2 ESTJs did leave more in-depth comments and said that they tend to hold it in and try to solve everything logically, and then at a certain point, they do tend to erupt in fury and anger and just blow up, but then they regret it later because, like ENTJs, ESTJs are very controlled. They like to show themselves in a very controlled way. And so if they ever lose control of their emotions, they tend to feel very ashamed afterwards, very regretful. And this isn't just something I'm saying from these 2 comments. This is something I've noticed with ETJs over a lifetime. They tend to sweep their feelings under the rug and focus on tasks more than feelings. When they do repress them for so long that they explode, they tend to feel horrible afterwards. So many times what ESTJs and ENTJs learn is that if they're going through something, they need to get away from people because they don't want that to happen. That's one of their big fears, is that they are going to lose control, and they need to be able to tap into their introverted feeling inferior function so that they can figure out what's going on. The exception to this would be Enneagram 8 ESTJs, and I have known a couple of those, and they're more likely to just give in to their anger and really just explode when they feel like it. And they're less likely to feel as ashamed or overwhelmed by it in the process. So that is one caveat I do want to mention, because with 8s, with all the types, if you're an Enneagram 8, you're more likely to give in to your anger, not to repress it. Next on the list were INFJs. 32.81% of INFJs knew how to ask for help when they were stressed. INFJs, a lot of what I saw with them was the same thing I saw with ISFJs as well as Ps. What they said was that, 1, they didn't want to burden other people. They often tend to be the helpers more than they are the people asking for help. They don't want to add anything to anyone's plate. The other thing they frequently said is that they didn't feel like people were going to understand what they were going through anyway, and it would be really frustrating to try to express it only to be met with someone who doesn't get it. So many INFJs still tend to hold their feelings in, and quite a few mentioned that what works for them is writing out their feelings. One person mentioned voice recording when they're upset so they could vent. They could get that feeling and that release of venting, but it was over a voice recorder, and then they would listen back to it to themselves, and then that would help them sort it out and put the puzzle pieces together so that they could move on. INFJs, though, they aren't the type that has the hardest time with it. Quite a few also mentioned that they have regular therapists and they call them up when there's a problem, or they have 1 or 2 confidants that they reach out to. Next on the list were ESTPs. 33.33% of ESTPs said that they knew how to ask for others for help when they're stressed. So ESTPs tend to be very independent people. They tend to be very action-oriented. They tend to try to solve their own problems for the most part, but they also are good at getting people involved, and they can be very good at delegating when there's a crisis. For example, I knew an ESTP who was an EMT, and he could get everyone in the room doing exactly what they needed to do, and he was the one that was in charge in that situation. And in fact, Linda Behrens calls ESTPs an in-charge personality type. They have an in-charge interaction style. So they're very good at delegating and getting people involved when there is a crisis or when there's an immediate problem that needs to be solved and all hands need to be on deck. That said, if they're going through something emotionally, that's going to be a different story. They might seek connection. They might seek emotional support or a hug or physical affection, but they generally don't want to just sit down and unload their feelings. In fact, that can make them feel worse. The only exception to this would be, in my experience, is that ESTPs do tend to want to vent when they're really frustrated, but they don't want anyone analyzing what they're venting, because it's usually after they vent that they realize, okay, now that I've said all this, I can see where there might be some logical inconsistencies in certain things I was feeling, but other parts of it were accurate. And they tend to take it apart, and they don't want anyone to just hold them to what they said and say, you said this, and they take it really seriously. They want to be able to just express whatever they're feeling, even if it's not entirely accurate, or even if it's unreasonable. And then after they express it, they'll go back and sort out what made sense and what doesn't make sense. For types with extroverted feeling, especially extroverted feeling in the tertiary position, it's harder for them to understand what's going on internally until they get it out, until they express it. Whereas for an introverted feeling type, they need to internalize and focus inward to try to understand what's going on, whereas types with extroverted feeling really do seek out sounding boards. But for ENTPs and ESTPs, this can feel very vulnerable, and they tend to just hate it when they express themselves and other people get really analytical or really serious about what they were saying, because a lot of times they just need to blurt out all this crazy stuff, and then at that point discard 25% of it or so. Once they get it out, then they can use their thinking side to make sense of it all. Right after ESTPs is ENTP 40.34%. So they knew how to ask for help when they were stressed. And so a lot of what I just said about ESTPs is going to apply to ENTPs as well. And then we get to the types who have the much more easier time asking for help. ENFPs 43.16% said they knew how to ask for help when they were stressed. ESFPs 49.56% said it was easy for them to ask for help. ESFJs 55.56% and ENFJs 62.50%. It's no surprise to me that the extroverted feeling dominant types are leading the pack here when it comes to asking for help. This doesn't mean they aren't independent. It doesn't mean that they're not good at solving their own problems. Extroverted feeling dominant types tend to seek out other people. They tend to look for sounding boards. They look for feedback. They're interested in how other people would process a similar experience. They look for alternate perspectives. They're very community minded, and part of what comes along with that is seeking out community advice and support when it's needed. There's less shame in expressing themselves and expressing their feelings, in connecting with others in that way. And EFJs understand that people are there for mutual support. Like, that's part of what builds connection and intimacy. And they're probably going to be the first people who reach out and try to help someone else who seems stressed or upset. And in the same way, they don't feel a lot of hesitance when it comes to reaching out and asking for support when they need it. Still, I feel like across the board, more people should feel comfortable asking for help. The top type, ENFJs, 62.50%. That's still a lot of ENFJs who don't find it easy to ask for help when they're stressed. And across the board, the numbers are just fairly low. I think a lot of this probably comes down to the fact that people are less community minded right now. There's less of a village particularly in US culture. People are more isolated. While they were really connected on devices and social media, people do not go to their neighbors to ask for help anymore. I mean, when was the last time? It used to be that you needed a cup of sugar or something, you go knock on your neighbor's door. There's so much less of that now. There's so much more. You don't even talk to the grocery checkout cashier anymore when you get your groceries. A lot of times we just get them delivered, and please don't ring the doorbell. Just leave them and go away. We're less and less connected as people. We have less and less interactions with people. So I think across the board, these numbers are still really low. I think people feel really hesitant when it comes to asking for help. And while that's not always a bad thing, I think developing autonomy and troubleshooting and problem solving on your own is a very important life skill. Reaching out to people is an amazing way to build a connection with someone else. You do not have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You do not have to solve everything on your own. It doesn't make you a burden to ask others for help. In fact, it helps other people to feel needed, and everyone wants that right now. Even though we live in a very disconnected world, we're wired for connection. We're wired to be part of a village. And so asking for help is one of the most natural things you can possibly do. But what gets in the way for that with most people is fear of vulnerability, a need for independence, fear of rejection. It can be over empathizing with others and worrying too much about what they've got going on. It can be a fear of losing control. When you ask for help, it's not going to be, everything might not be handled in your exact style. It might be that someone brings their own style into the mix, and that might feel a little bit uncomfortable for you. But asking for help isn't something to be ashamed of, and I'm going to be writing more about this in my article. Hopefully we'll be able to look for and find some ways for each of the types to feel more comfortable with asking for help. If you'd like to find out more, definitely check out my website at psychologyjunkie.com. If you'd like to take part in the survey, I will be leaving a link in the description, because the more voices we get, the better and the more accurate our results will be. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to this. Please like and subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.